Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to everybody. We had a little glitch here, and I'm still trying to get something else straight. Hold on for a minute. Okay, where is my stuff for chats? I don't see it up here. Yeah, but then when you push it over, okay, just hit the chats. Yeah, I can hit that. Yeah, okay, fine. Now pull it back over to the right so I can see everything. Okay, that's fine. Now the problem is going to be when I go to respond to chats, I'm not going to be able to do a command. Bring it over a little bit to the left, because no, because I still can't see the command for chat. And when I get into the discussion, I won't be able to. No, just pull it over a little bit to the left, the screen. Come on, I'm off screen now. Put it back on screen, Sonora. Yeah, bring it over to the left a little bit more, to the left a little bit more, the screen. Okay, I've got the comments, but still left a little bit more, the screen. Yeah, now to the right. Okay, to the right. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, that's good. Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure this is right. Okay, that's good. All right. If anything comes up, I'll call you. Thanks. Greetings, everybody. We had a little glitch here. We're showing a interview that was done on IREFM, and the screen wasn't set up right. And so we got the screen set up right so we can get started. Greetings to everybody. As you know, this is the Dr. Obachashaka show. And for new viewers, hit the subscriber button, the red subscriber button. And if you like the show, hit the like button. Last week's show was on Steve Bannon, the brain of Donald Trump. And the show before that was 2025, the Heritage Foundation program for the election if they succeed in putting a right-winger in office, specifically Donald Trump. So this show is an extension of that in that it's going to be showing how neoliberalism impacts countries outside the United States, specifically the Caribbean, focusing on Jamaica. But it's also going to be a cross comparison between Jamaica, Barbados, and the United States. So this is to give you an idea of how this neoliberalism works on a international plane. And I'm going to be using a framework for analysis that you'll see that is the best framework for understanding generally what's hit African-American communities and African nations since 1968, called The Choice Between Two Cultures, and I'll explain that in a minute. I'm giving a background to an interview that was done on IREFM, which is the national radio station of Jamaica. And this interview was conducted by Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru, who was formerly director of IREFM and who now has a show on IREFM on Sunday. And so this interview was recorded last Sunday. So what I'm doing is providing a background for the interview, and then I'll show the interview. The interview was originally scheduled to be filmed on this show, and it was going to be recorded and saved and then showed for this show. And the interview itself is on IREFM, so you'll see me holding my phone. But because the technician in Jamaica could not get in and make that hookup happen, Cinnabar, my communications person, the person who deals with this show, who's a technician, he was able to record this show, but we missed about 5 minutes of the interview. And this show will have a little hazy background because of the way in which he had to do that recording. So don't be talking about, oh, this isn't so easy to see and all this stuff. It's actually artistic. It actually looks good this way. So the topic for this show is a choice between Euro-American neoliberal culture and African-Jamaican culture. So that's the topic. And if you looked at the promotional, you saw a picture of the sister that you won't see in the interview, who is Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru, who, among other things, is a radio broadcaster. She brought me out to Jamaica in 2014 when I addressed the Jamaican people on the anniversary of Garvey's birthday. And the speech itself reached 1 million people. And IRI FM is the national radio station of Jamaica. And I'm very thankful for Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru for the good work that she is doing in Jamaica and internationally. So what I want to do is provide some background that will help with understanding this interview, and the background will be brief on other aspects of neoliberalism that have not been covered before. And one, I want to just provide a little bit on some aspects of the formation of neoliberalism as a philosophy, and then how it was applied to Jamaica briefly, and some conditions inside of Jamaica that set it up for this neoliberalism being brought to Jamaica. And then we'll get into the interview. I'm going to have a song by Bob Marley to precede the interview itself. So just as background, it's important to understand that with neoliberalism, there are two major thinkers in the United States who are not really deep thinkers. In fact, their stuff which introduced neoliberalism was largely, especially in the United States, propaganda. Even though one of them is a economist, at least one taught in the economics department in the University of Chicago, Milton Friedman, and then the other one taught in another department, but was also an economist. And so these two are, as background for this, a man named Hayek, and then Milton Friedman. Hayek, a European economist who worked for some time in the UK, wrote a book in 1944 that was basically a book in opposition to the Labor Party that later came into power, but to the policies that would be pursued under state intervention in the economy. And he was basically opposed to measures that would benefit the poor, the working class, and the middle class, such as medical care, government medical care, Social Security, basically the application of what was the New Deal in the US to Europe that was actually more comprehensive than even the New Deal in the United States because it included medical care. He regarded these programs of government intervention as totalitarianism. And when in fact, the totalitarianism has always been dictated by the people who control the economy, the rich. And once these neoliberal policies were put into effect, it would really have an impact on the poor, more so even in the United States. Milton Friedman is the primary author of neoliberalism in the United States, and his policies would have great effect under the Reagan administration. His writings were basically propaganda without any real solid backup. For example, in the book that he writes on neoliberalism, he misquotes deliberately John F. Kennedy's statement delivered at his inauguration, where he said, Don't ask what the country can do for you, ask what you can do for the country. Now, that's actually a motto of this elite school that he attended. But Hayek treats it as he's asking for what the government can do for you. So this is pure propaganda. And so Milton Friedman is basically opposed to just about everything. He's opposed to, a minimum income. He's opposed to labor unions. He's opposed to Social Security. He's opposed to public schools. He's opposed to just about any programs that benefit the masses of the people. And neoliberalism, which, by the way, liberalism doesn't mean what you think it means. That's 19th century conceptions of liberalism, which is basically about the economy running everything. People who own the economy running everything. That's what really they mean by liberalism. So, but those are terms that are always played to confuse people. This is a hypocritical system. So they'll say they're for freedom when they're practicing slavery. They will say they're for humanism when they're practicing racism. When they're getting ready to lynch you, they're going to say it's not a lynching. So neoliberalism is not about liberal as in doing some stuff that maybe not be that radical, but could be beneficial to people. This is about really cutthroat capitalism that puts everything in the pockets of the rich. So, and then if you're going to basically describe what neoliberalism is, it means basically privatization. It means basically whatever are government programs, fold them and put it into the pockets of the rich or simply eliminate them. So, for example, one of the neoliberal agendas is to privatize Social Security. Where would that go? It would go into the pockets of the rich. And then after that, it would be gone. And they'd probably sell it by allowing the people on it to continue so that they wouldn't cry too much and then everybody else gets messed up. So this is neoliberalism. And so in the United States, it took a crisis before they could begin to implement this neoliberalism. And that was the crisis that occurred in the Carter administration, which was high inflation, high interest rates, and high unemployment. And when Milton Friedman comes in and begins to advise Reagan, then they impose stringent measures on the poor and they begin to implement neoliberalism, which had been tested in other parts of the country, in other parts of the world. In the previous show, I talked about how they tested it in Chile and Indonesia. And they murdered 1 million Indonesians, got rid of Sukarno, who was a militant who wanted to improve the conditions of his people. And they installed a band, a general named Suharto, and they brought University of Chicago economists to Indonesia who had been trained by Milton Friedman. And then they began to destroy whatever programs were benefiting the poor or the working class. And their main objective was to get to the oil, which they have one of the largest supplies of oil in the world. And when Salvador Allende was overthrown in Chile under the government of Nixon, with the help of Henry Kissinger, Darth Vader, then they installed the same neoliberal economists that had been trained at the University of California, So this is basically trying out neoliberalism. And then what ends up happening is that's brought back to the United States. So how does this apply to Jamaica? Jamaica was picked as a test case to see how the neoliberalists could spread neoliberalism to Jamaica and the Caribbean. It was a part of a test case for the Caribbean. And again, they wait for a crisis. And so in Jamaica, in the 70s, when Michael Manley was in office and trying to serve the people, he had problems. Couldn't balance his budget. The goods that he was selling overseas wasn't getting a fair return on their price. There was high unemployment. The numbers were over 25%. And so he went to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and seeking help. And in the first negotiation, he aligned with Harold Wilson's government, which was a labor government in Britain, and he got good terms. But because they still needed money, they went back a second time. And that's when the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and World Bank that enforce neoliberalism globally and enforce it in Africa through what's called SAPs, Structural Adjustment Programs. And that's what they began to apply to Jamaica and other Caribbean countries. And it required to continue to get loans. And this is adopted because Manley never adopts neoliberalism, but the successor to Manley, who's really a gangster, I mean, while a major concert is being held in Jamaica, where it's supposed to be a peace concert, what's happening is Siaga is using this concert to smuggle in guns. And so reggae music is being played, and at the same time, the destabilization is going on. And then later, drugs are introduced, gangs are introduced, the CIA intervention. And Siaga is a willing participant in this because this is when Reagan comes in, because he comes into office in 1980 after Michael Manley. And so what ends up happening then is he takes on neoliberalism full blown. And what neoliberalism does, because you have this crisis in the economy, is bring great poverty to the people. But it's one that's negotiated by the elite in Jamaica, those that are running the economy, and major businessmen, those that you have. And so what neoliberalism does in Jamaica is really destroy the Jamaican economy based on the conditions of SAP, Structural Adjustment Program, that you got these loans on condition that you pull the government out of providing benefits for the people. For example, one of the benefits that Jamaica provided for poor people were subsidies so that they would have a means to buy food. At one point, when the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank are imposing structural adjustment on conditions on Jamaica, one of the conditions is in the subsidies on food. So that means poor people don't have anything to eat. In Jamaica, 50% of a Jamaican's income goes to food. And then the same thing with anything that would provide subsidized housing, cut it or end it. And so you see the rise of people who are in shanty towns and stuff like that, as opposed to having housing. So this is all a part of the philosophy of neoliberalism that is then applied to the United States. So you'll see in this interview, the overview for looking at structural adjustment is coming from the integration trap generation gap caused by a choice between two cultures, chapter 1. And the sister, Kahabu Ma'at Keru, got this book when I was in Jamaica in 2014. And she says she's read it many times. And this is the overview for the analysis. And it shows you just how pinpoint accurate this analysis is, because she said she's read that book over and over again. And it enables her to better understand what is happening to Jamaica, because the book predicted what is happening now. And so as the economy begins to erode more and more, she's seeing what God told me was the effect of these external forces that hit Black communities in the US, that hit the Caribbean, that hit Africa. A choice between two cultures. No one's seen this before. And do not think that the European or European America did this to do that. Yes, with drugs, because, that's a culture. But all these other programs, they were not designed to create a choice between two cultures. They didn't think we had one. I've talked about this before. This was unintended consequences. But she sees this unfolding. I'm stressing this because the choice between two cultures analysis comes from God. And I made this point to you. Those are not my words. Came through the light. Some people never respond when I say this. But my two best works, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, that leads to the twinlineal thing, which is based on equal male-female empowerment, all the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society. Those are God's words, comes through the light, telepathically. I didn't hear any words, but it talks without speaking. And that's where all breakthroughs in science come from, and my best ones come from that. And so in the case of a choice between two cultures, as Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru pointed out, she begins to see more and more, because as the effects of structural adjustment or neoliberalism, implodes on Jamaica, then she's seeing the effects more and more, and it becomes clear that these are called a choice between two cultures, because she's seeing cultural behavior emerge that she's never seen before. So that's the negative side. So when the title is A Choice Between Euro-American Neoliberal Culture and African-Jamaican Culture, capitalism is a culture in and of itself, based on private profit and private property, and of the rich, and protecting it, and the value of matter over human beings. So that is the effect of it, because everything has a culture to it, and capitalism is a inhuman culture. But in this particular case, neoliberalism stripped to the bottom, where they're leaving people nothing, so the rich can grab everything. So privatization means take whatever government programs you have and put them in American corporate hands, the hands of the rich, that control most of the wealth of the world today. The same thing happens in Africa. I'm making this point to make the point that a choice between two cultures defines both the problem and the solution. And so that's why neoliberalism is being framed in this way, because the positive side, because when God gives you an answer, they give you the whole of a part, or as I pointed out before, in Dogon philosophy, in anything is everything. That's God's mind. You never get all of God's mind. But if Einstein, through a dream, gets the theory of relativity, then he's getting the message that time is relative at the point of the Big Bang. When the universe comes into being, it's relative. It's not the same everywhere. And that proves to be true. He never got that just through logic. And logic is important. And you got to master whatever field it is to get this. And I spent 63 years now, at the time I got this vision, about 40 in organizing. But I would have never got this answer, because it's a total answer. And so just as it formulates the problem, which is stepping outside your culture, it poses the solution, which is drawing from the best of your culture combined with economics, politics, social systems, philosophy, every dimension that you need. That's all got to be packaged to produce this. You hear me? And so that's the key point in terms of the overall perspective for this interview. So that's a background brief on this interview that Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru has of me, but it's also a conversation because I told her that I wanted her to put forward her own ideas because she knows Jamaica better than me. So what I'm going to do now is go to a song by Bob Marley and then get into the interview. Okay.
Yeah. All pirates, yes, they rob I, and they sold I to the merchant ships. Yes, minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, but my end was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. We forward in this generation triumphantly. Won't you? Whoa. Another song of free man, 'cause all I ever have. Redemption songs, yeah, redemption songs. One more thing. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, 'cause none of them can stop the time. How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just a part of it. We've got to fulfill the book. Would you help to sing another song of freedom? All I ever have. Redemption songs. Redemption songs.
Okay, so we need to free ourselves from mental slavery, and those who have allowed neoliberalism to occur in Jamaica, those weren't the people. That was an elite that went along with this, and their minds are enchained in contempt for their people, and their minds are enchained in greed. And so there's always some goodies that they offer a small number of people. And you have in this country, the Congressional Black Caucus has pretty well signed on to neoliberalism. Both parties have. And the average person, Black person in this country doesn't know what that is. They've never heard of it. And that includes a lot of professional organizers. So if you're going to be able to fight an enemy, you need to know him. And as Bob Marley was singing there, you got to free yourself from mental slavery. What's happening with neoliberalism is it's creating a new form of mental slavery. In some ways, worse than slavery, because we came out of slavery with a culture, a new African culture that we created in slavery. In the Caribbean, it was one that was an extension of Africa, but because ours was attacked because we were a smaller number of people in this country, we had to recreate it. But it's fundamentally African. And that's why Africans could come out of enslavement with their humanity intact. But with neoliberalism, it comes in, it's an invisible market force. And it's not something that our culture was geared for. And so it's not easy to see until the effects start to take place. And then unconsciously, it puts people in a position of making choices. And in drugs, it's obvious, they're drug choices and it's demonic. But in the case of the overall effects of jobs leaving a community or whatnot, then it's cultural shifts. But this is the opportunity where at a time of crisis, you can go deep inside yourself and draw from the best of your culture. So what I want to do now is go to this interview with Kabu Ma'at Keru, and I don't want to hear anybody saying, oh, it's not as sharp. And we had to improvise on this because we couldn't do this the normal way because we're taking a radio show and then at the same time recording it for YouTube and Facebook. And that would have been easy if the proper hookups were there, but they didn't have them. And so then Brother Cinnabar improvised. And this is what he came up with. So you're not going to see Sister Kabu Ma'at Keru. You're going to hear her voice. This beautiful sister here, you'll hear her voice. And, you'll hear the comments that she makes and comments that I make. So let's get into this. And Baldwin said, since the late 60s, powerful hostile forces have hit the Black community, the type of which we were not prepared for. And so that clicked. And then I'm sitting in my study one night and I'm asking in a humble state, because when I get these insights and the return to the African mother principle of male and female equality comes from a higher level, this is where real innovation comes from. All innovations in science come from the intuitive level. That means from God. Einstein's theory of relativity, he has a dream, he sees himself riding light, and he has the breakthrough in quantum physics. So this one is really giving me the answer to the problem and the solution, because God's mind, when God communicates with us, it's a whole and a part. God's mind is whole. We think in parts, though intuitively it's usually more whole. And so what I'm asking is, and I don't expect to get an answer, my question is, what happened? Because there's mess going on in the Black community. I don't really understand the cause of it. And so the answer comes, and I see a light when this happens. And there's no speech, it's telepathic. And it says a choice between two cultures. And with what Baldwin had said, I put those two together. Since the late 60s, and this would apply to the Caribbean and Africa as well, powerful hostile forces in the form of what ends up being neoliberalism at the time was the transfer of jobs outside the country, manufacturing jobs into places like Mexico and China and other places, which by the 80s was a part of the neoliberal agenda. In 1968, when it occurred, the U.S. had not yet adopted a neoliberal agenda, but they had decided to park the manufacturing base, as much of Western Europe did, outside the country so they could benefit from the cheap labor of these countries, particularly China, and then they could get the products they manufactured and sell them. And they never thought China could use this to rise up as a competing world power. So these forces that hit the Black community are starting in 68, but becoming real heavy in the 80s. And this is a time when Milton Friedman, who's the author of neoliberalism, is now connected with Ronald Reagan in the White House. And his philosophy also spreads to Margaret Thatcher in Britain, because Reagan and Thatcher become allies. And so these neoliberal policies that become full-blown in the 1980s are policies that work more on taking the government sector out of people's lives. And this is largely an attack by big business on the gains made during the Roosevelt administration, where you got Social Security and where you got government employment and other benefits that benefited the masses of people. Over time, Blacks. In the beginning, it didn't benefit Blacks in the South because Southern senators blocked that. So what ends up happening is, by the 80s, which is the time in which Seaga embraces neoliberalism in Jamaica, and they had tried out neoliberalism, because neoliberalism by Milton Friedman is basically a political economics philosophy based on propaganda, based on little truth, that basically says, and this is what Reagan said when he came into office, the problem with the United States is government. Government is the problem, and he called it big government. But what he meant was government that provides services to the people, like Manley was trying to do in Jamaica and other places.
And now, and now, sorry to interrupt, Baba, but now we have this ideology, which, I'm reading over your book again, and I've read this book so many times, but every time there is an aha moment for me, because you spent some time laying out what characterizes this ideology, this commitment to free market and deregulation and privatization and limited government, etc. And one of the things that jumped out at me from looking at what it was a fair warning to me, your book. I don't know if you see it this way, but really it serves as a template to what was about to come. Here in the Caribbean, with Jamaica at the forefront of all of this, we're facing this complex and evolving clash of cultures, if you will, because we're grappling with the impact of the neoliberal project. We're seeing this tension between the economic globalization and the extent to which we can preserve our cultural diversity. This is a problem on the island. It's a very, very serious one. And not just on the island here in Jamaica, we're seeing this within the Caribbean, even on islands like Barbados, that the Caribbean is looking to now, that we're saying is leading this process. But Barbados itself is engaged in the epitome of what can be described as a neoliberal project. How do we effectively confront this clash of cultures that we're grappling with here on the island, do you think, and in the Caribbean?
Yeah, well, first is to understand it, and I think people in Jamaica and in the Caribbean have a better understanding than Africans in America, because generally, if you ask the average African American what is neoliberalism, they don't know what it is, because their leaders, particularly members of the Congressional Black Caucus and others who are established political leaders, have kept their mouths shut on it because they signed up for it. You know what I mean? So, and in this country, both the Democratic and Republican Party. But to be clear about clash of civilizations, the effect of neoliberalism, and this is what God was telling me in a choice between two cultures, is when you attack an economy. And so in the case of Jamaica, they attacked your independent economy, your milk economy, your meat economy, bauxite, which they wanted to really get their hands on, and other sectors of the economy. By when you signed up for loans from the IMF and World Bank, they attached conditions. And one of those conditions was that you eliminate or lower the tariffs that you had. Tariffs are a tax on goods coming from another country, and you have to have them, because the United States would not be the global power it is if they had not had tariffs on goods coming from Britain, which was the dominant economy in the world, and other economies. And so once they did that, as Jamaicans know, then what it did is it did in your milk industry, because then you could buy powdered milk coming from the US at a cheaper rate than good milk, because you had a thriving milk industry. And they did that with other sectors of your economy. So then they bring the economy down, force you to devaluate the dollar, your currency, and then come into a situation where you're providing subsidies for people that at least poor people give them something that enables them to buy food at a cheaper price, and they push the government. And this is in part because your government's complicit, but in part it's part of the deal, because basically neoliberalism is a collaboration between the elites of whatever country is adopting them and the IMF, World Bank system that the U.S. initiated in the Bretton Woods Agreement during the end of World War II. So you have to have compliant elites that go along with this. In the case of the United States, because we don't have a nation state, we're a nation within a nation. We don't have a president except for Obama, and he wasn't really our president, and it's our nation. So in this case, it's a tax on communities that then uproot whatever was going on. And in the case of the Black community of the U.S., the attacks of neoliberalism has really weakened the Black family from 75% two-parent households for 100 years to 29% two-parent households today. And white families have been eroded from 75% two-parent households to 50%. And a good reason for Trump getting elected to office was his fake populism that made the whites think that he was going to fight this neoliberalism. So the effect of all these things that they do to bring you to the ground in terms of your economy, and they usually take an economic crisis to do it, because Manley himself was having problems with the economy in the 70s. He was trying to do what he could. And then Seaga comes in, backed by the U.S., with gangs and violence behind him, and he adopts this neoliberalism, the Milton Friedman Project. And so when your economy is brought to the ground, then what happens is it's impoverishing the people, but it's creating a situation in the U.S., in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Africa, where a cultural clash occurs. That's what God told me, that the effect of this is a choice between two cultures. So in the case of Jamaica, what you can see is, as the people of Jamaica find their economy ground to the dust, you're not allowed to really, the average poor person is not allowed to really get the financing for a business. You have to do your businesses at night, where you've got people who are, selling food or wherever they can to try and survive at night. But what people are looking at, Jamaicans are looking at, is the difference between the prosperity of the tourists that come to your country and the poverty that faces you. So that is one cultural choice. So some people want to opt out of this thing and say, well, let me leave the island, let me do something else. But the point is, overall, when you impoverish a people, it begins to create a situation where people are thinking outside their own culture that had never occurred before. So
hold that thought for me, Baba. I'm going to pick up right there when we come back. This situation that has been created so that we have Caribbean people, Jamaican people thinking outside of our own culture as we look at it.
And optical elements have the latest technology lenses and frames to suit your taste and budget. Internet subscription has the treatment online at opticalementsja.com or call 929-8284. Optical Elements, vision in style. Designed by Optical Elements Films.
Now, 8 o'clock, you're inside of the Africa Forum. This is Running Africa, and my very special guest online is Professor Obasi Shaka. We call him Baba. Now, the Caribbean region and Jamaica, we're talking specifically about Jamaica, but this is happening across the entire Caribbean. We could throw in the continent of Africa, but let's look at the region. We see where there's something unfolding in the Caribbean region right now, where a dominant economic and political ideology that you heard Professor talk about emerged in the latter half of the 20th century. Neoliberalism has taken root in this on this island and in the region. You talked about tourism, Baba, and that this becomes one of the choice that African people, Black people on the island here in Jamaica, Jamaicans and Caribbean people find themselves with this culture, with this choice between culture, the prosperity of the tourist, because that's the kind of tourism that is being practiced, and the poverty, which is real, that the people themselves are going through. I want you to build up on that a bit more for us, as you also look at how we have now embarked on this path where we're choosing an alien culture because of this reality on the ground.
Yeah, well, I think it helps to look at Barbados and compare it to Jamaica in looking at this. And my wife is from Barbados, and then so I've looked at it in part because of her, and then her prime minister and previous leaders, except for one group, the one that precedes Prime Minister Motley, have served their people. So in the case of Jamaica, they have a similar situation, but their economy was not as big as yours. Not as large in terms of population. The island is small, a couple of 100,000 people, but tourism, banking, and education outside of the government sector, these are major sources of employment. So in the case of Barbados, what you have is people are actually able to prosper or at least benefit from tourism. And that's because the way it's set up, the economies of scale that people are operating in Jamaica, whether it's small businesses or whatever, restaurants, various things that the people own, the tourists who come in there frequent those. You know what I mean? So that's a part of the economy, but they're still trapped because um, they are completely dependent on goods coming from the outside into Barbados, and they're extremely high. And they've had to go to the IMF for loans as well, but they did not get their dollar devaluated. It's a 2-to-1 exchange rate. I don't think China has a better exchange rate than that. And so as a result, they have protected the well being of the people. In the case of Jamaica, you all were targeted because you had a bigger economy and they wanted stuff. And so the stuff that they laid on you was much more harsh. So in the case, we were talking about this earlier, in the case of Jamaica, you've got a much more prevalent all-inclusive scene, for example, with tourism, where someone comes into a particular hotel and they're encouraged just to stay there. And they're in fact told not to go out and frequent with the people, you know. And so then the people are then cut off from whatever they could benefit from their own businesses and stuff like that. And then you have ecotourism that you were talking to me about, where the environment is supposed to be a part of the tourist thing. But then in some cases, the areas where ecotourism has worked, those are areas where people were living and their houses had to be torn down for it. And in other cases, it's still not easy for people to actually get access to the dollars, that is, everyday Jamaicans, to the dollars that are coming from the tourists. So tourism is a mixed blessing. Cuba had to go to tourism after the Soviet Union collapsed and it began to produce inequalities in the countries. But in the case of Jamaica, you're making the point that uh, today, Jamaicans don't have access to the beach. In Barbados, that's one of the conditions that they laid out on hotels and everything, is that they had to leave access to the beach for the people, you know? So the very thing that makes you...
The activism of the grassroots in Barbados speaks to a lot, though, of why Barbados remains with the beaches, the people having access to the beaches, because I know that people like Gabby, the beach is mine, and so on, and Jack ain't on the beach,
Right.
and so on, that they had to fight the same fight that we're fighting now. The difference is that their government listened in Barbados, and so they still have access to the beaches. But as we speak, there are ongoing demonstrations in Barbados because it's the very same neoliberal agenda and this neoliberal project that is being unfolded there. We have people talking about the public health that's falling apart, the education system that people are saying in tatters, and we see the videos beginning to come out of Barbados with people demonstrating once per month and so on. We see a very similar thing happening in Trinidad and Tobago, where the very same neoliberal project, which foregrounds individualism and consumerism, we see the blowback on the majority of the people, the masses of the people. In Trinidad, we see in Barbuda, we've been talking to persons in Barbuda, where the corporate capture of government under this neoliberal project is now on overseeing a project that is chasing Barbudans or the entire island of Barbuda so that they can make it into a hotel and a den for tourism, for this kind of a neoliberal kind of tourism that they're practicing.
But here's the key point that you were making, that the key to neoliberalism is the capture of government, or a compliant elite that serves as the leaders of government. They have to go along with this, and that's the real big fat problem. In the case of Barbados, they have used, because they have not had the capital that they needed for a lot of their projects, they've gone to the IMF, but they have not got their dollar devaluated. In this last IMF dealings that Barbados has dealt with, one of the things they've done with the money is build 10,000 new houses for people. You know what I mean? And they've repaired roads. They started providing services because they had one corrupt government. In the history of Barbados, there's been one. How many in Jamaica? How many in the rest of the Caribbean? So a key to this whole thing is you got to have a leadership that cares about the people. In the case of Barbados, they're not radical. They're not like Michael Manley, but they love their people, and their prime ministers and their leaders walk around with no security because, they're loyal to the people. But right now there's real upsurge in Barbados over the fact that the prime minister used the Social Security monies to secure the last IMF loan because they were completely broke. And this has only come out in the last few weeks.
Baba, isn't this a conundrum for us though? Because what the IMF does is to lock us into debt, ongoing debt,
right,
that we can't. The history shows that we're not able to survive with these kinds of loans and so-called aid from the Bretton Woods institutions.
Well, your prime minister, your former prime minister, probably one of your best, Michael Manley, said his biggest mistake was going to the IMF. Now, that's a hard thing to say because he was trapped at the time his government was in power. There was also economic crisis, and the stuff you were exporting wasn't getting what they should have got on the exchange market. And so what he was saying, and in the first negotiation with the IMF, he lined up with the Labour government in Britain and got a good deal. But then after that, they came after him. So a key thing I think about this whole thing is, and it's pretty clear, is that for the Caribbean or for any area to break out of this, they need to have alliances and coalitions with neighboring countries. In this case, CARICOM, which I know has got its own problems. You were talking about them sending so-called peacekeepers to Haiti, which is no peacekeeper. Anytime the UN sends a force in or any of these other forces, all they do is clamp down on the people. But the thing is, it's the small economies that are in the position of being open to this and compliant leadership. We need good leadership that cares about the people. And because right now, this opposition to the prime minister of Barbados using Social Security, she had no choice because the government that had been in office, the only dishonest government they've had taken everything. So they had nothing. And so when they were dealing with the IMF, they had to have something. So they put that up. Now, she didn't just give away Social Security. What she's done now is say that people can't get Social Security until they're 65, whereas at 30 years in is what vests Social Security in Barbados. So if you come in at 20, at 50, you could retire. So people are really angry, and you can understand why. But she was caught between a rock and a hard place. So here's the key point. Barbados is an example of a country, and in the case of Motley, she actually studied this IMF thing and pushed it to the limit in terms of trying to get what she could get for the people. And the lesson is it won't work. The lesson is as long as you're tied to the neoliberal agenda, it will not work. And the fact is the people are better without the loans, period.
And that's the bottom line. Earlier you talked about, and we did say we're going to come back to it, what has happened to the Black family. how the family has disintegrated under this neoliberal project. And how does this happen, Professor Obati Shaka? How did we get to this place where the black family has, where African people, Jamaican people, Caribbean people have bought into this individualism and consumerism? How did we get to this place?
Can I ask you a question? In Jamaica, what percentage of Jamaicans are married?
Are married?
Yeah.
I don't have that, but let me look that up while you talk. Go ahead.
Okay. So, because, for example, the neoliberal project, when you look at a place like Britain, the black family has not been eroded like it was here because there's a social safety network that Thatcher tried to attack, but it comes out of World War II. So you've got all kinds of government programs, including government health care. If you lose a job in Britain, then the government pays your mortgage until you get another job. And if you come out of prison in the UK, they got a place for you to stay and stuff like that. And so they are actually about rehabilitation, not for blacks. That's a white system, and blacks are just benefiting from it. But in the US, it hit us hard because, first of all, there wasn't much of a social safety net anywhere. But when they come into the community, plant drugs in the community, bust up communities, and take jobs out of the community where a father could support his family or a father and mother could. No finance, no romance. The average black person in this country is working on an income of about $20,000 a year. And you can't support no family on 20. That doesn't even pay for rent. So the point is, impoverishment weakens a family. But I would guess that in Jamaica, it's not as bad as it is in the United States. I'd like to hear the data on that.
There's a report that I've just put my hand in. I know I need to go to the Statistical Institute, but just before I do that, on a report from 2019 from the Jamaica Gleaner that headlines "Marriage Gets Cold Shoulder," and it says that Jamaicans are fast falling out of love with marriage as weddings have plunged almost 23% in the 9 years up to 2018. That means almost 10,000 fewer people are getting married. I'll go to the Statistical Institute in a little while, but marriage at 2019 plunging 23%. I mean, that would have been a serious plunge. And they were quoting data from the Statistical Institute, which spoke to that. That data was
which is basically the result of extreme poverty. And so when you have extreme poverty, people cannot afford to marry, or at least that's what they think. Now, we would say, in the U.S., we would say, well, we maintain two-parent households during sharecropping, and people weren't really getting paid. New legal slavery, where you're working on someone else's land. At the end of the year, you end up owing them money. And so, but the family stayed together, but that economic unit was needed for work. It stayed together, but it mainly stayed together because in enslavement, we maintained family relationships in the Caribbean, in South America, in the U.S. Now, you all, because you dropped African culture in the Caribbean, meaning you were 99% of the people in most islands, African culture continued in a pure form. So polygamy, even though it's outside marriages and frowned on and everything else, continued. But in America, it didn't. But the key point is the two-parent household and the extended family community, which we have in common in the Caribbean, South America, the African world in general, did. Drugs weakened the extended family community and drove a wedge between the young and the old. So the crisis of culture on marriage. And so what's happening is now singlehood has become normal. You know what I mean? Because if 29% of your families are married, the rest of them are not, then people are dealing with single situations. I had a former student who went to law school. She's a lawyer by now. And when she's lonely, she said, I'd rent me a man. Have a single man over and take care of him. And she would take care of him. Well, what a sad situation that is. So the point is, neoliberalism is destroying the family. And neoliberalism isn't just destroying black families. In the U.S., it's destroying white families, but it's destroying more of us because our economic circumstances are worse. But the people who are falling out of love with marriage, it's not that they're falling out of love or out of love with marriage. It's just that they can't do it. It won't work. But culture is the key to reviving this. Our culture is the key to reviving this.
In the next 15 minutes, because we have 15, just about, not quite 15, but probably 10 minutes when we come back from this break, let us talk about that, Professor Obati Shaka. How can culture revive the family, and why do you say culture is the key?
When I need to order concrete for my big or small jobs, I order only solid concrete. Yes, solid concrete mix from my money that I buy. Solid concrete mix is
17 now after 84.
Did you know that only Bill Express Online is completely free to all customers? Don't waste money. There are no fees for payments made on Bill Express Online. Setup is simple, and Bill Express Online is free. So start saving money. Pay free online today, even on your mobile at BillExpressOnline.com. That's BillExpressOnline.com. You can depend on us.
Back with you inside of the Africa Forum. This is Running Africa. My brother, Ross Jomo in Buffalo, just sent me a note to say one of our good sisters and friends was stranded at the airport in Israel. She said the missiles coming rapidly and they had to shelter in other parts of the airport. As of last night, the airport has been closed. We're trying to get to that sister to see how she's doing. We're speaking with Professor Obati Shaka, looking at a clash of two cultures confronting the neoliberal project in the Caribbean with emphasis on Jamaica. Professor, you said, as we went into the break, culture is a key here.
If the neoliberal project or any other that's hostile to the interests of the people creates poverty and creates a situation where people are ground to the dust, their economies are weakened or destroyed, then it's going to have an effect on the every institution in society. And the neoliberal project is an expression of Western culture, Aryan culture, which is the basis for what we call European culture today, that is based on cruelty, basically. And there's a whole history of this. If people watch my shows, the Dr. Obata Shaka Show, DrObatShaka on Facebook and YouTube, Dr. Obata Shaka Show, you'll see us going into this. So neoliberalism is a culture, and it's a culture of greed, and it's the culture that benefits a very few. So anything we do to resist it has to have culture as the foundation. And it has to be a cultural resistance, a political resistance, a social resistance, an economic resistance. It has to be total. But culture is at the foundation of all of that. Now, at the heart of African culture And African Caribbean culture, new African culture, that's what we call African American culture, because we had to reformulate it. It was under a heavier attack than in the Caribbean because we weren't the majority in the US. The core, and my book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, is the only study in the world that reveals this. This comes from another experience of the light that I won't go into. But what I'm able to show is the African family system is not matriarchal, it's not patriarchal, meaning it's not a family system ruled by males, it's not a family system ruled by females. It is not matrilineal. Just because your last name may come from your mother, it doesn't make it matrilineal. These are anthropological terms that Africans never used. And it's not patrilineal, it's twinlineal. And what that means is African cultures from the earliest period, from the hunter-gatherer period, going back 149,000 years to the period when we became agriculturalists around 10,000 BC, to the period of the founding of Kemet, which was also 10,000 BC, called the Anu period. And these were agrarian agricultural Twa, or what some people call pygmies. These societies were based on male, female, equal empowerment. And the reason why two-parent households could be sustained in the United States for 100 years, the reason why extended family communities and family structures in the Caribbean and South America could be sustained during and after slavery is the cooperation of males and females. That was really what we had. In the U.S., we didn't have land, we just had each other. So what we have to do in terms of family relationships is deal with the crud of slavery and colonialism. And the neoliberal project is new economic colonialism. What we have to do is really work on strengthening the relationships between African men and African women so that there's an empowerment that's balanced, because that's where power comes from. Our power is in the hands of our people. In the case of Jamaica, it's in your land because it's your island. You got to take it back. And so that's key. And then the extended family community, that is the community of play brothers and play mothers and sisters, as well as your own family, uncles, aunts, and so forth, that reinforce families. Those have been weakened. Those have to be strengthened. But the other thing is this. Twinlinealism, the cooperation of males and females, isn't just about family. Twinlinealism is a political formation, because in the hunter-gatherer societies and in the agrarian democracies, which Chancellor Williams discusses in his book, Destruction of Black Civilization, his chapter on Africa, the birthplace of democracy, is the best chapter in that book. What they're all showing is that these first agricultural societies coming out of hunter-gatherer were democratic. Africans give birth to democracy, not the Greeks, because the Greeks only had it limited to about 25,000 people, and it was a group of people picked by a lot who then always chose between the rich to elect. But the African system was one where the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. The key thing about Jamaica is this. The key thing about other areas of the world where the neoliberal project has been engaged, it's been engaged by leaders without consulting their people. And so these leaders have made decisions on their own. And so a key thing, the islands have to be taken back. That's easy for me to say. I know that's hard in terms of empowering.
That's the bottom line at the end of the day. And another point you're making about twinlineal, and the point that the African male-female relationship, there's been a stress in the Pan-African community and a consensus community on the matrilineal focus. And you're saying that African societies are not matrilineal or patrilineal, but we're talking about African male-female relationships to rebuild the family. But there's a triple threat, because we've got the neoliberal agenda, which of course includes the public-private partnership, stakeholder capitalism, and the corporate capture of government. But there are other agendas that are threats to the African family. And I think for us, this time is more critical than maybe any other time in our development as African people.
Yeah, remember this. Social structure governs everything. From social structure comes your philosophy. From social structure comes, what social structure is the organization of family. From that comes your economy. From that comes your political system. From that, of course, comes your moral system, which is your philosophy. So Ma'at, which is a governing principle in Kemetic systems, which is a system we need to draw from because all African cultures were rooted in that, which is truth. It means many things, but basically it's grounded in truth, and it's reduced to one sentence: speak truth, do truth. When you had leaders that were really responsible to the people in the best societies, the people made decisions at the village level. Two, speak truth, do truth. The leadership had to mouth the people's will because the people who were selected in those in which you had kings and queens, they were what you called the best men if they were men. They were the ones who never lied, never cheated, never cursed, never abused their people in war. They were brave. They were the best ones, but they never made decisions on their own. If you had kings like in Ghana, they were subject to the will of the group. Because that came from, again, social structure, lineage, which was twinlineal, where at one time it was the women who were in charge of the lineage, at another time the man who was not in charge but was the nominal head, but they were first among equals, and at the lineage level, all the males and females were equally empowered to govern the lineage. And that's the same thing with the councils of kings in Africa. In this case, Asante Hina, Asante Wa. The point is this: in formulating power, to take back power, we have to reconceptualize what we mean by power, what we mean by organization, what we mean by a state, what we mean by leaders. And so these have to be formulated so the people have the final say-so. That is the key point. And when the people have the final say-so, if Africa had its final say-so right now, Africa would not be looted of its resources and people wouldn't be living on an average of $2 a day on income. You know what I mean?
Baba, I'm so sorry that we're completely out of time. But I want to thank you so much for your expertise, for your knowledge, and for just guiding us in this space this morning. We are going to take what you say and what you've said on board. You've said some really critical things that we're going to be taking on board. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I enjoyed you, and you keep up your good work. And the people of Jamaica, we love you. You know what I mean? And we need to work together as a people, as one people, under the banner of Pan-Africanism, one African people.
One Africa. We'll see you again. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Okay.
Thank you so much. All right, over to you, Shaka there. We've done by. So it's 8:30. We're standing by.
Okay. I hope you got something out of that. This show covers ancient African history. It covers African culture, ancient and modern, new African culture, family structures, the art forms of our people. It covers a wide range of things. And here it's showing how, as Malcolm said, you can't understand what's going on in Mississippi unless you understand what's going on in the Congo. And so you're seeing it's basically the same thing, different in that the Caribbean, you've got nation states. Here, you've got a nation within a nation. Nations are people with a common culture. The African American is a nation within a nation, but not a state. We don't have a president, an army, a government, and stuff like that. Not at this time. So, but it's the same situation that's going on, are very similar. So solutions in one part of the world can be helpful in other parts of the world of African people. And so this final point I was making about twinlineal, I have not really gone into that in depth in the show. I've made some comments on it, But my book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, which is the most important work I've done in my life, this book here, called Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And the book has introductions by John Henry Clark and by Dr. Asa Hilliard. And this, again, is an innovative book. I'm an innovator. I've got 6 schools of thought I've innovated. The 2 best come from God. This is the best. This comes from the beautiful light. So I have not gone into this in depth. I did systematic study of ancient African families, and 14 of them that precede Christianity or Islam. And I had already had a vision that the just societies of Africa were based on, as God said to me, again, telepathically, they were societies where all the male, I'm quoting God here, these are not my words, all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. I knew instantly that that was the Twa. I see someone up here said, my studies call them Bantu. No, they're Twa. Bantu different. You know, Bantu refer to people, and these are people from South Africa, and they generally were not Twa, Bantu, and the Twa civilized them later. But the world's first people are Twa. The Greeks called them pygmies, meaning stunted sized people. They're not stunted sized, they're fully grown, they're just small. And they come into being, according to mitochondrial DNA, 149,000 years ago. According to mitochondrial DNA, of course, a lot of us go back 200,000 years. But I like mitochondrial DNA because it's not based on just some little find, a bone or something, and then you date it, and then you say everybody is tied to this. So when I got that vision, and see, when you get these kind of breakthrough visions, it's only when you've done hard work. Einstein stuff was on quantum physics. Had I seen myself riding a sleigh at the speed of light, a sledge, I wouldn't have known what that meant. I'm not a quantum physicist. He did the work. A lot of other physicists did too. But what gave him the leg up was when God gave him the answer, theory of relativity. You hear me? That came through the light. That's a total answer for time. It's relative, right? After the Big Bang. And so Coltrane's droning sound in music, that was a heavenly sound. That led to a love supreme. In this case, I'm a warrior. I've been fighting for revolutionary societies where the people are empowered. They're not ground into the dust. That's been my life. And so God, after doing a lot of hard work on this, God gave me a vision. And that vision is total. And I can't even explain all of it here. And I've done a lot of documentation on this. This book in size is it's nearly 500 pages, but I reduced the typeset to 10-point font. Normal font is 12-point. This is about a 700-page book. Took 5 years to write. This book complements Marimba Ani's book on Urugu. She does the unjust society. I do the just society. I've explained this before. She and I made a presentation before ASCAT in 1995 when both of our books came out. And, we got an hour to speak each. 1,000 people were at that ASCAT, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization assembly. Jacob Carruthers, Asa Hilliard, John Henry Clark, Leonard Jeffries and his wife, Wade Nobles, a host of others. And when I talked to John Henry Clark the following week, I said, well, what did you think? John said, well, I was there to see my replacements, meaning me and Marimbani. But he didn't just mean me and Marimbani. He meant a number because John said he had a mind better than 40 people. I said, maybe 400. So he saw a lot of us as replacements. It would be an honor to be put in that category. But the key point is, at that conference, I laid out the basic vision, because it was not a thesis. It's not a hypothesis, which is a guess. It came from a vision. And that's what it was. And so I laid out a basic analysis of that. And it was a critique of Diop's two-cradle theory. And all I'll say is I proved it to be wrong in terms of the southern cradle. And the northern cradle I've since proven to be wrong. I'm not going into that now. And in this book, the southern cradle, which is the one that argues that Africa was the zone of matriarchy, I proved that's wrong based on data. Wrong, wrong, wrong. But the key point is twinlineal. These hunter-gatherer societies were balanced societies where males and females, again to quote God, were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. And that was for a period of a good 130,000 years. These people have been left out of history. They've been put in the back seat, in the back basement of anthropology, where people don't really have history. They don't have philosophy. They're quaint and they study them. And this is a field for conquest study, anthropology. It's for the study of people of color. And very few whites included in the field of anthropology. And in fact, and they call these societies, prehistory. Then they say by that they mean without writing. Then that puts a good part of Africa, which was oral, out of history. And so why aren't the teachings, say, of Socrates knocked out of philosophy since they were conveyed orally? Or Pythagoras, who never put his stuff in writing because he was a student of the Kemetic mystery system, and that was a requirement because the stuff is secret, So why don't you remove all of these from philosophy since it was oral? It seems that you can be oral with white people, but Africans or Native Americans, anything like that, well, you're removed from humanity, you're removed from history, you are removed from deep thought, which is the Dogon term for philosophy. You hear me? Deep thought. And Jacob Carruthers, actually deep knowledge, and then Dr. Carruthers called it deep thought, and I'm pretty sure that's where he got it from. So all people have deep thought. Doesn't mean everyone's a deep thinker, and sometimes a few people have a deep thought. My friend who's a mathematician, Leon Dixon, says 97% of people's thoughts are no good, meaning they ain't accurate. He's a mathematician. He's also into music, and he also studies Black folks. I don't know about 98%, but a lot of our conclusions aren't right. That's why I had a policy of consensus in core. And that's why we had the only successful Black power, Black freedom movement in the North. And I made that point, and I don't get no feedback on it. We addressed poverty across the board. We kicked the ass of the whole economic power structure. That's why the FBI and CIA came after me. I understood when I entered the battle. I had just cashiered out of the Marine Reserves, brainwashed Negro, but I woke up in core and I understood lives are at stake here. You hear me? So you won't hear me complaining, oh, they tried to kill me. It's war, baby. You hear me? I'm still alive and it ain't no accident. But the key point is this: twinlinealism, male, female, equal empowerment is the best. And don't reduce this to Ma'at. I'm just giving you an example because then you're going to throw this out. Just say, oh, it's just Ma'at. No. But it is the best definition of Ma'at when it comes to just societies, just families, just communities, just economic systems. And I'll say this: those societies of Africa that either were similar to this or were right on board with this, they were the most just societies you've ever seen. And Native Americans replicated that. And some early Asian societies did. In China, the women in this early period, because they were also Twa, the whole world was Twa. There was a whole period of world civilization of the Twa. You see any books on that? No. You hear me? And you just go to Kemet. And then you don't even go to the founding of Kemet, which is my specialty, the Anu, which Dr. Finch has also written on. I need to get his book. He's going back 10,000 BC. Why you start at 3,200 or 3,100? Why you do that? When they said they began 10,000 BC, when they said their first pharaoh was a Sar, and that was well before the first dynasty. I calculated to be around 4,500, 5,000 BC. It's in the precessional cycle of Shu and Tefnut. I use astrophysics to do the dating and stuff. But the key point is the founders of Kemet were people who had this social structure based on male, female, equal empowerment. When you have that, and the only societies on the planet Earth that didn't have slavery were the Twa. Because if you empower males and females equally, ain't going to be nobody over you. And you're so, a lot of us are so turned off, based on our oppression and our white supremacy. They're exercising white supremacy over us. Well, it seems like the Vietnamese solved that one. It seems like the North Koreans, when Mao got mad and ran the Marine Corps out, I was watching a show recently on that where one guy was saying his whole unit was wiped out. That was America's first defeat. Huh? When they went into Iraq and Afghanistan, where's the white supremacy? Huh? It's gone down the drain. Who in the hell comes to power with more power than any other power in the world? And in 27 years, you blow it. Neoliberalism is part of the reason why they blew it, because they're out to get everything for themselves. They're out to wage war on everybody. And then they can't even win them. They get their butts kicked. You understand? And this country is in rapid decline right now. You hear me? Because of this. And so they ravaged our communities. And I saw a comment up there that someone made about the leaders had guns put to their heads to force neoliberalism. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. In the case of Jamaica, they went along with it. If you know Jamaican history, you know there's an elite in Jamaica that never cared about their people. Some of it's based on skin color. A lot of it's just based on identifying with blacks. Garvey talked about that, and they're not the only ones, Same thing in Haiti. The people are strong. That's the strongest African culture in the Western Hemisphere. Ours is second. Theirs is first, the Haitians. They freed themselves from enslavement, and they're still fighting. You hear me? But they have an elite that has nothing but contempt for them. And they've been aligned with the French, aligned with America. You need to study class structures because we have them. And some of them grow out of slavery. And so in the case of Jamaica, it was a complicit leadership. There was a period in Jamaica where they had the government kept people on neoliberal SAP structural adjustment programs when they weren't getting any money from the IMF. What do you think of that? That's how much they hated their people. And remember, the sixfold stages to mental freedom, that assimilated mindset is deadly. And when you put it in the hands of leaders and then give them a little army and give them a little police and give them some money, and then, of course, they're all looking for honey, then you just got a perfect recipe for hell. And they will hook up with anybody that will give them a little bit more. Hell with the people. And that's the problem that Africa's facing, Nigeria, where that corrupt leadership has taken everything, given nothing to the people. Or the Congo, where neighboring African leaders in Rwanda, Uganda, and other places have been complicit with the United States and other American and European corporations, and the Chinese have been a part of this, where they've killed millions of people. The Chinese haven't killed millions of people, but the Chinese have been managing the cobalt, getting rich off of it. And it's African children and women who are digging cobalt out by their hands, and it's poisonous, it's toxic, it kills them. You understand? But that's the corrupt leadership that America, it comes out of slavery. And then when they kill Patrice Lumumba, and then they bring in Mobutu thought that was bad. Mobutu pocketed everything. That's called kleptocracy, where they take everything. He just built a few roads between his mansions and the capital. You know what I mean? But it got even worse after he died. You want to talk about a choice between two cultures? You got people now who are heading up little armies and recruiting child soldiers. This happened some time ago, not just in the Congo, and that's based on greed. So, and sometimes assigning the kids that they recruit to kill their own parents. Choice between two cultures, in this case, greed trumping everything else. Greed is the worst of all vices because you'll do anything if you're consumed by that. So the twin lineal thing, that is the ultimate healer. I'll be going into that at other times. That, along with economics, politics, I'm an organizer, so I'm not putting my eggs in any one basket. And don't label me a cultural nationalist. I'm into culture, politics, economics, spirituality, social structures, art systems, the whole 9 yards. You hear me? And that's what happens when you have some balance in what you do. So I hope you got something out of this discussion. I'll be doing some other things. Sister Kabu Keru, so she wants me on the next time to explore twin linealism. And that's a major piece. That's a whole. Again, a totality. In the case of just societies, it's the whole of it. And over time, I've been able to better understand that formula of male, female, equal empowerment. It's total. And for 130,000 years, a lot of people followed this system, but it's been ignored. It has to be revitalized. That's the thing about a crisis. Opportunity on the sad side, breakdown on the positive side to make things better. So I hope you got something out of this. Let's see what I saw a number of comments that I thought was very, very interesting. Worley Smith, must read Return to the African Mother Principle, Male and Female Equality, and Dr. Marimba Ani's book, Yorugu, An African Critique of European Cultural Thought and Behavior. Yeah, and it's a good book. My book on Seba, To Know the Truth is to Be the Truth, that I'm finishing, that's a replacement system for teaching. That book is a deeper critique of the Aryan worldview and Aryanism, which is the basis for the European. That's where they come out, or originate from. And then it puts forward a replacement system for teaching. But if you think it's just the classroom, it's total. My greatest teaching didn't come from the classroom. I had nothing but white teachers from elementary school through law school, PhD program, nothing but white. You know what I mean? It came from the battlefield of the Black liberation movement. It came from waking up. It came from going into African systems for mastery, which is the second half of this book on Seba. It's the mastery system of the Dogon, the African-American, and the world. And so that reshaped me. That's why you see me all over the place, because I'm not just a specialist in one area. I'm multidimensional, because as a warrior, to defeat an economic power structure, the most powerful, going to defeat the biggest bank in the world up and down the state of California, you had to know your enemy, and you had to be a hell of a strategist. And in this case, I needed help. That's the only time that I didn't have my own strategy. I had to pull a team of the best people I had in core and come up with it. And you want to know what that is? You ain't getting it until I write the book. You hear me? We took down the biggest bank in the world. It was David against Goliath. And all we had, as one preacher said, was a slingshot. Actually, it was a strategy. It wasn't a strategy. It was strategies. When I fight a system, they're beat. I'm not fighting you unless I know your weaknesses. And I got a strategy for you. And then strategy is the ultimate art. It's the art of beauty. Only things more beautiful than that is God, love, and the truth. God, love, and the truth. After that, strategy is the ultimate art. Prettier than poetry, prettier than music, prettier than the finest women. And I'm talking about not just physically pretty, I'm talking about real pretty. Why? Because the prosperity of a people depend upon the strategies that they live under. Societies that pursue just strategies, that's where people live the best. And those hunter-gatherer societies were the most just. And by the way, it wasn't Bantu, it was Kung. The first people were Kung, K-U-N-G, or called San people. And when you quote David Imhotep, who recently passed, and we lost a great brother, he is referring to the Kung, not any other people, not the Bantu, when he talks about the migration out of Africa during the worm glaciation into Europe. He identifies them, and he's correct. And I've used his stuff. His stuff is very good. That was a beautiful brother. A little guy who was a boxer, who played football, who was the nutritionist for Muhammad Ali, and he's written a book on Muhammad Ali. Just after he wrote that book, he died. It was like he had to go home. He had finished his work. He did great work. I love that brother. You know what I mean? And we had him on the show. Go back and check out the show we did, David Imhotep on Muhammad Ali. Go back and check that show out. You know what I mean? Huh? Check it out. He was a little guy. And his wife was telling me when she called to let me know he died, I already knew he had died. And she was saying that she has brothers who are 6'3" and 4. And David Imhotep said, oh, what I could do with a body like that. But she also said that those brothers weren't half as fierce. And he was a very nice brother, but as a boxer and a football player, you know, not as fierce as him. I said, yeah, because size ain't what matters. It's the spirit inside. Marcus Garvey was a little guy. You know what I mean? Goodman said, master the art of war. I'm trying, but it's my first passion. I'm kind of like any animal that's into hunting, like cats. Oh, they're alive when they get a chance to get out and stalk a prey. I'm most alive in a battle, but I ain't looking for one. Yeah, David Imhotep was bad, brother. Worley Smith said, I have similar education, white teachers, so you are now one of my masters. Thank you. Yeah, what a shame to go through that. I mean, I got absolutely nothing out of any of them. You know what I mean? But I had good teachers, my mother and my father. And then the ones that I began to fall in when I got in this Black liberation movement. Oh, thanks. Well, that's a nice compliment. And Sister Robin, she's one of our most dedicated people. And Higher Heck up there. Thank you, Higher Heck. Let's see it. M. Jewel, Noriega was built by the U.S. and he turned on them. That's true. That is true. Yeah. I mean, he's serving a gangster. It takes gangsters to work with gangsters. You know what I mean? Though you don't have to be a gangster to work with gangsters. You know, sometimes can be saintly. Chad Jomo Kenyatta, that Neanderthal warmongering thinking has got to go. True. King Kam's Ujumbe. They or the Europeans want to start at 3200 because it's closer to the beginning of their civilization. Yeah, but it's the African scholars who do the same thing. And they'll argue over 100 years. I got a friend who's writing a book. The whole book is dedicated to proving that it was 34 or 3300 BC, because also that 3200 or 3100 puts you in a trick bag, because then they can take the Sumerian civilization and say it's older, even though they don't have the proof of it, because the Sumerians worked in clay. And so they don't have any permanent evidence, like in stone and stuff, that would prove these assertions. But anything other than Africans being first. Okay. Higher heck of this type, demonocracy, that's a good term. They impose means that the president says what goes, the people have no say. Not only that, but the parties say what goes and the people have no say. So, and then the corporations tell the parties. And basically the parties go along. And then the real scam is Democrats and Republicans get together, and then once they make a decision, then that's supposed to be a consensus. So other decisions or other points of view aren't questioned, like what's happened recently in this war in Ukraine. Until recently, both Democrats and Republicans have signed on. Now the Republicans, under Trump's pressure, are questioning that, and I think they got a point too, because the U.S. needs to foster a peace which was on the verge of happening. The U.S. stopped it from happening. Dan Freeman, this is my buddy here, Lawrence Freelow. It's astonishing and unfortunate Garvey's vision still hasn't obtained the same level of enthusiasm in his own country as it was among Africans outside, except the Rastafarians. There's truth to that. There's also truth that Garvey's thinking has to be updated, because I also pointed out that coming up under the colonial master, Garvey had bought into some of that himself. And it took Africans in America to radicalize Garvey, particularly on the anti-war issue, which some of us also went to war and came back knowing we had been used, and others refused to go. So it was blacks under the anti-war position, which was really opposition to World War I. And then when it was over, then anger at having been fooled by their own leadership, NAACP, Du Bois, and others, to go fight in World War I. And so that anti-war sentiment and the fight back sentiment against the Klan and against whites who had come back from the war and began to start bloody summers, blacks fought back. And it was that spirit that radicalized Garvey. And then he learned from blacks in this country, as I pointed out in a previous show, race consciousness. Now, you ain't supposed to have it in Jamaica. It's a majority blacks. You're not in contact with whites on a regular basis. Race consciousness is in a system where whites are running it, or they play a dominant role, and therefore, you see things through that lens. And so it's not that Jamaicans should be race conscious. But in this country, if you're going to move blacks, you'd better be, A1 Goodman, nobody wants to be poor. It's not all about the Benjamins. Food, clothes, and shelters, basic necessities. Correct. And with all the problems that Jamaica had in the 70s, they were self-sufficient in their economy. And in fact, at the end of colonialism, Africa came out economically self-sufficient, meaning they could feed their people, because most of the colonial countries did not have settlers who made up a large part of those populations. Some did, but most didn't. And so Africans, even though their economies were twisted, they had to grow something that made a profit on the international market that's called cash crops, and it hurt the rest of agriculture. Still, people had more say-so. Higher Hecka, this is a very important subject and topic, the economics. Amos Wilson breaks it down brilliantly. Yeah, Amos Wilson's work is good, and his work on Black Power is exceptional. Big old thick book. One of my specialties is I'm good at economic development. Among the nationalists, I'm the only one. I believe that if you can avoid it, broke ain't no joke. And some of us act like being poor is a definition. See, Black people are poor because of oppression, but some of us act like, who are in the movement, like being poor is proof that we're dedicated. Well, if that's the way it is, fine, I understand. But if you have any understanding of economics, you should be able to do something to improve your condition. I'm not saying that for everybody, because of the way this economy and the way this racial system is set up. But economic development, that's important. I learned some of the importance of this from Garvey, but it's in my family. My mother was good at this. My brother was good at that. I'm good at that, you know. And I've taken no money for any movement that I've been involved in. Whatever I have, whatever it is, came on my own, not from any white people. I saw this comment before. This is a good insight. Alexandria White, Jamaica Kincaid's book, A Small Place, speaks to this issue, as does the movie Life and Debt. The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind also reflects the impacts of a neoliberal agenda in Tanzania in the late 90s. Seems to me that neoliberalism is a new form of colonialism. I'll check some of those books out. In the case of Tanzania, I've explained before that Julius Nyerere put on the ground the best program for emancipation for African people from economic oppression, which means also political and social oppression, through his Ujamaa villages, Ujamaa. And as a chair of Pan-African Peoples Organization, we went, along with the team of 11 of us, went to Tanzania in 1973, and we worked in the Ujamaa villages for 3 months, up and down Tanzania. And this was a move by Julius Nyerere to take this family system of Africa that he called Ujamaa. It's also been called communalism, or sharing through the family. And it's one of the days of Kwanzaa, Ujamaa. And because he had been raised in these types of villages under colonialism, but these are systems that come deep out of Africa, then he set up a system for organizing the economy, the education, the healthcare, a total system in the villages in the 60s and then in the 70s. And we went in the 70s. That was defeated not by the IMF and the World Bank. It was defeated by the African elite that Nyerere felt he had to have because his country had to be Black run. But these were Oreo cookies. Black on the outside, white on the inside, and had no love, no faith, no nothing for what's called the Wenanchi. That's the term for the people. They're agriculturalists. And these elitists had gone to universities and turned their backs on anything agricultural. They defeated Ujamaa villages before there was neoliberalism 2 times. And they were successful. Last time I was in Tanzania was 1984. I met with a brother named Bill Sutherland. Bill Sutherland was the highest ranking African American in the Tanzanian government. And he gave me the prognosis in 84 of how the elite had destroyed the Ujamaa villages. You need to understand the problem of the Black elite, the brainwashed sector that we called house slaves. And not all house slaves were brainwashed in slavery, but many were. That's the modern day house slaves. They are in league with the system that oppresses us. And if you don't think so, if you think black, we're all the same, no, we ain't. You know, some of us are in bed with the oppressors. A1 Goodman, Barbados is much smaller than Jamaica and not on the U.S. doorstep. They're all on the U.S. doorsteps. This is America's backyard, the Caribbean, South America, and they ruled it. Now China has displaced America as a trade partner with Brazil. And in the case of Jamaica, Chinese goods are flooding Jamaica. The problem is people are impoverished. And so it's not that, don't discard people's success by saying, oh, it's because they're smaller or because they're smaller than Jamaica. No, it's because they've had damn good leadership. And you've got plenty of small countries like Guinea-Bissau, which I spent a lot of time on, talking about Amilcar Cabral. It's a drug import center now. It's been compromised. It's a small country, small number of people, about the size of Jamaica. Size ain't what it is. It's the quality of your leadership. It's the attitude of your people. These Barbadians, though they have come up under colonialism like all the rest, they took the best part and used it for themselves. And the Jamaican masses liked themselves. Barbadian masses like themselves. Barbadian women don't conk their hair, don't straighten their hair. You know what I mean? They ain't radical. As John Henry Clark described them, they're the goody 2 feet of the Caribbean. They're law and order people. That's a part of what they got from Britain, but Britain never practiced. But what they did is they took the British educational system and took the best part and provided free education. They provide free education for their people to this day. And the people who do the best, they end up going to Harvard and Yale and Oxford or to the University of the West Indies. Some of them come back to the country and they provide leadership. You need to study this. All we like to do is talk about how messed up things are. When something's working, find out why. And that's why, and Motley's one of the best prime ministers they've ever had. You hear me? And this woman improvises on her behind. She's good. She's good. And I'm not resting everything on leadership because it's the people. They got good people in Barbados. They're living better in Barbados than most of you are living in the United States, even though they got high price of everything and they got to go to the IMF for loans and stuff. They still owe money. But the fact of the matter is, whatever they got, they used it, except for the last, not this government, the one before, the only ripoff government they've ever had. They use it to improve the conditions of the people. So don't discount why they're successful. You need to study it. It's true, being smaller, they weren't the target that Jamaica was, but let me tell you, if the Barbadians had not handled the IMF stuff well, they would have tried to impose the stuff on them that they did everywhere else, and their leaders don't let it happen. Hi, Heckler. Them demons have devised a brilliant strategy. One can't even see it. One can only feel it and see the devastation it causes. That ain't brilliant. There's nothing brilliant about it. What it is it's savagery and barbarism. And it is coming in when people are desperate under a crisis and then upping the conditions to restructure the society and then restructure it out of the existence of prosperity. Keep them in continual debt. There's nothing brilliant about it. It's that they got the power to do it and they imposed it, and they impose it particularly in places where the leadership is complicit and goes along with it. You hear me? That's the key thing. And so that has to be opposed. It is being opposed at the mass level, but at the level where you can take government out of their hands. If you look what's happening in Africa with Niger, if you look what's happening with the mass movement that's developed in South Africa, what you've got is new leadership coming forward and saying they're not taking this anymore. Did you see Macron of France, the prime minister of France, get up and apologize for ripping Africa off and saying that he's going to pay reparations when all he wants to do is get back into Africa because they kicked his white behind out? You hear me? So there's an awakening that's occurring in Africa. There's an awakening here. It's got to be politicized. And you that watch this show, those of you that are in organizations, let me know what the organization is. Those that aren't, then, get in something. Get involved. That's going to help rebuild your communities, build some power. Check them out. The ones that got some sense. Heck, implementation of neocolonialism as culture of the state means very difficult for the students to have a choice, no? Yeah, it means that you're going to have to fight the state. Yeah, so what's new? Huh? Difficult? We've been through far more difficult stuff than this. Wale, speak truth always. Help to revive our ancestors' reputation by imitating their commitment to truth. Teach your children to do the same. Speak truth always. Mm-hmm. True. Yeah, redemption song is beautiful. Chad Jomo Kenyatta, he's got an EEOC case, and he'd like to teach writing skills to file discrimination and ongoing harassment cases against corporate America. Yeah, good. M. Jewell is talking about how the beaches are being closed in Jamaica. True. Yeah, this is Lawrence Freelo. He's in Indonesia. Yeah, right on, Lawrence. Lawrence, if you're still on, get into my system so that we can correct the donation part so it starts working. You had set it up, but it wasn't completely set up. Wolf Manley was talking about some serious stuff happening in Southern Africa. You better believe it. Lao Tzu is referring to the Palestinian situation. That uprising is very important. Hamas has launched a massive attack against Israel. It has killed this idea that the Israelis are secure while they can launch attacks against the Palestinians every day, as they have since they took Israel away from the Palestinians. This is a whole new day. And what's happening now is mass killings of Palestinians, civilians, men, women, and children, babies. And it appears that the objective of the Israeli government is to kill a lot of people, mash the country up, but particularly destroy its infrastructure, which means hospitals, schools, and everything else that people who are cramped into a very small space, put on a starvation diet, and constantly under attack face. So we should be in support of the Palestinians. Yeah. If there's anything else here. Okay, Lao Tzu is out dealing with his youngest, teaching mathematics. Good for you. The Rastas got their promised land in Ethiopia. Oh, really? Oh, really? The The promised land for people in Jamaica is right there in Jamaica. But if they want to go to Ethiopia, that's good too. But Ethiopia is in some bloody struggles, so you better be prepared for that. Wally, truth breeds trust. Trust breeds unity. No one unifies with those they do not trust. Yeah. Wally, make something valuable. Yeah, well, the thing is we have, and then they come in and bust up communities and stuff. So we got to rebuild. True. And we got to defend whatever it is we're building. Yes, I was listening to the Mau Mau Chronicles, and many of the people willingly gave in to the Euros. No fight at all. I wonder what you're talking about. If you're talking about the Mau Maus in Kenya, that's not true. If you're talking about the Mau Maus in Kenya, which was not their term, the British created that term. They waged an armed struggle, and they fought. And when Jomo Kenyatta was released from prison, he became the president of Kenya later. He sent in a man named General China, who had been one of the Africans who had supported the Mau Maus, and told them to come out of the forest. And when they came out, they took their weapons and gave them nothing. And these people had been a people that fought for independence using an eye for an eye, a bloody struggle. And when they came out, Jomo Kenyatta was sitting on a chair, and I was told this in Nairobi, Kenya. I didn't get this from a book. And he's surrounded by white people. They were his bodyguards. And when the people came out of the forest, they said, Mzee, which means elder. Do they have you captive? He said, no, he only trusted them to protect him. You know what I mean? So the Mau Mau did not give up. You need to study, do your stuff before you put stuff out like that. That ain't true, you know? Besides war, what would be a good strategy to free people from the shackles and chains? We have a number already. The Black Freedom Movement in the South freed you from the shackles and chains of segregation or legal apartheid, and from denying you the right to vote, which they're doing everything to erode, but can't completely take it away from you. Strategy is the art of, in a situation, figuring out how you can empower a people to have a better life, to rebuild communities, to rebuild families. Ultimately, strategies are short-term and long-term. So the short-term ones don't give you the complete answer. The long-term ones are the ones that do that. I do both. And my 6 innovations are on long-term. But what's different about mine than most systems, especially European systems, is you can apply them to yourself, to the person, to the family and the community right now. While at the same time, as you're doing that, you're working out the problems, the kinks and stuff, and then you use that for long-term transformation of society. So strategy is an art, and it's applying it. There's personal strategy. You apply it to your life. The first rule in personal strategy is don't do dumb. Do smart. And make the best move you can every time. Anytime I'm dealing with something that I don't know that well, I go to people who are experts in that and get advice. I don't just follow it. It depends on what they say. You know what I mean? Because I like to make the right move. Strategy is like if you're going somewhere, go the quickest route as long as it's safe. That's good strategy, you know? Strategy is if you got friends, make sure they're worthy friends. That's good strategy. In relationships, you know, you forge relationships. If you're talking about relationships between a man and a woman, with good people, that's strategy. Then there's strategies for how to have a marriage that works. There's strategy, strategy and everything, baby. You know what I mean? And if you don't know, go to somebody that knows. Always ask questions. Another strategy is to listen. You see me running my mouth. I'm a real good listener. Real good listener. Because we're here to learn. And I know I don't know half of what I need to know. Not a tenth. So I'm always looking out for ideas. I'm a listener. Some of you are. If you aren't, develop the habit of it. Okay, looks like that's it. See if I missed something up here. Okay, that's it. Hotep, hope you got something out of it. Until next week.